The ballroom of the Central Plaza Hotel was the kind of place that felt like it had been staged for a magazine shoot. Crystal chandeliers casting golden light over polished marble floors, a live quartet playing just loud enough to make you feel important without drowning out conversation, and the air faintly scented with winter florals and champagne. Every corner seemed to sparkle, every guest dressed in their finest. I should have felt comfortable here. After all, this was the annual Christmas charity gala, one of the most prestigious events of the year and one I'd been attending for nearly a decade. I donated generously, served on the planning committee, even sponsored the silent auction table. But that night, the moment I caught sight of Melissa, my stomach tightened in a way that no fine wine or polite conversation could loosen. She wasn't with me. Instead, she arrived alongside Jared, her boss. They stepped through the entrance as if they were the headliners of the evening, his hand resting just behind her back in that subtle, possessive way that could be passed off as gentlemanly if you weren't paying attention. Jared was a tall man with the kind of easy, curated charm that made people think he was listening when he wasn't. He wore his tux like he was born in it. Melissa, in turn, looked like she'd been sculpted for the dress she wore. A deep emerald green silk that draped elegantly over her shoulders and caught the light in soft, liquid ripples. Her hair had that just right softness to it, and she wore a lipstick shade I didn't recognize. What I noticed most, though, was the necklace. It was delicate, barely more than a glint of silver with a single, perfectly cut stone resting just above her collarbone. It wasn't flashy, but it was *mate. Something about it, the way it sat against her skin, the way she seemed to tilt her chin ever so slightly as though to draw attention to it, told me it wasn't just another accessory. And I knew, without the faintest shadow of doubt, that I hadn't given it to her. I forced myself to smile as she noticed me from across the room. She didn't wave, didn't make her way over, just acknowledged me with a quick lift of her eyebrows, like she'd spotted an old acquaintance she couldn't quite place. Jared leaned down, said something into her ear, and she laughed softly, her hand brushing his sleeve in that casual, practiced way that said she'd done it before. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself to focus on the reason we were here, on the good cause we were supporting. But the knot in my stomach was stubborn, pulsing every time I glanced toward them. And I glanced more than I wanted to admit. When the toasts began, everyone gathered near the stage. I found myself standing just to the side of Jared and Melissa, close enough to catch the faint trace of her perfume. Something floral and new. Jared took the microphone, his smile wide and easy. He thanked the donors, the organizers, the community. And then, with a flourish of mock camaraderie, he gestured in my direction. "This is Evan, nobody, just someone standing nearby." It was meant to be playful, I suppose. The crowd laughed, a polite ripple of amusement rolling through the room. But Melissa, she laughed first. She laughed the loudest. Her head tilted back slightly, her hand brushing Jared's arm like she was in on the joke. Like they shared some private understanding about where I fit in this picture. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I let the sound of her laughter sink in, memorizing the way it felt. Sharp and cold, like stepping barefoot onto ice. When the applause for the next speaker began, I stepped back slightly, watching them from the corner of my eye. Melissa placed her hand on Jared's shoulder, lightly, but not fleetingly. Her fingers lingered for a beat longer than politeness required, as though she was holding her place. They stood close enough that her dress brushed his jacket, close enough that I wondered if they'd simply forgotten there were other people in the room. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that Melissa had always been friendly, tactile even, that Jared, for all his slick charm, probably acted this way with everyone. But the logic felt flimsy, like I was building it out of wet paper. Later, when I finally found a moment to speak with her alone, if you could call standing near the coat check alone, I asked about the necklace. I tried to sound casual, my voice light. "New?" I asked, nodding toward it. Her fingers instinctively reached up to touch it, almost protectively. "Oh, this? Just something I picked up the other day," she said, eyes already darting toward the crowd. You know me, couldn't resist. I knew her well enough to know that wasn't how she shopped for jewelry. She thought about it, agonized over it, made me weigh in on even the smallest purchases. But I let it go. And when I mentioned how close she and Jared had seemed on stage, she laughed. That same dismissive, slightly patronizing laugh she'd developed over the years, the one that told me I was being ridiculous before she even said so. "Oh, Evan," she said, brushing the thought away with a flick of her hand. "It's harmless. We work together. We've been through a lot this year. Don't make it weird." I smiled. I even nodded. But inside, I felt something shift. A small, almost imperceptible fracture. Because the truth was, it was already weird. And I didn't make it that way. Leaving the venue felt like stepping out of a photograph and into cold air that didn't know my name. The valet line chattered with tipsy donors and jingling cufflinks. But my head was somewhere else, rewinding the night like a tape that kept catching on the same frame. Melissa's laugh, the necklace, Jared's hand on her shoulder like a stamp of ownership. I told myself to breathe, to focus on the road home. But the silence in the car only made the questions louder. Truth is, the gala hadn't created my suspicion. It only gave it stage lighting. For months there had been little edits to our routine, small enough to shrug off, until they weren't. The first was her hours. "It's just a crunch," she'd say, kissing my cheek without meeting my eyes. "Q4 is a beast." The crunch stretched from autumn leaves to frost on the windows. I started eating dinner alone more nights than not, reheating leftovers in a microwave that hummed like it was keeping a secret. Then came the evening meetings with friends. Melissa used to narrate her social calendar like it was a podcast episode, who would be there, what they'd gossip about, why the tapas place had better lighting than the wine bar. Lately it turned vague. "Drinks with the team," she'd toss over her shoulder, already halfway out the door. When I asked who exactly, she'd say, "You don't know them." It landed like a period. Her phone learned new tricks. The location services that always pinged the coffee shop near her office went dark. Like a lighthouse that suddenly decided the ships could fend for themselves. Notifications disappeared behind the polite veil of "Do not disturb." At 2 in the morning I'd hear the soft moth-wing buzz of a message. "Work?" she'd mumble, turning the screen face down. I told myself big projects had weird hours. I also told myself I wasn't the jealous type. There were purchases tagged as personal expenses. Neat little withdrawals from our joint account. Not huge, but steady. Melissa is responsible with money, sometimes to a fault. She'll agonize over a sweater and then research coupon codes like she's hunting a rare species. Now the charges just appeared, tidy and unsmiling. From boutiques she never mentioned and rideshares at odd times. When I'd ask, she'd say, "I covered a team thing. They'll reimburse." Or "holiday gifts. You'll ruin the surprise." I accepted those answers because accepting is easier than admitting the math isn't matching. I noticed a new perfume before she admitted to buying one. It smelled like winter in a hotel lobby. White flowers, polished wood, someone else's idea of elegance. She wore it on weeknights. She wore it when she was too tired to attend the neighborhood potluck but somehow had energy for a client mixer across town. On the nights she stayed home, her laptop glowed like a second moon. If I came near, she angled the screen. Not dramatically, just enough. I replayed all that while waiting at a red light that seemed personally offended by me. The crosswalk counted down like a judge. In the reflection of the windshield, I looked like a guy rehearsing a line he didn't want to say out loud. The line was simple. "This isn't nothing." Memory started dealing out cards I'd ignored. The September barbecue we skipped because she was buried. The October book club she bailed on but somehow texted me a photo from a rooftop bar. Client thing ran long. The photo had been cropped in a way that felt careful. No faces except hers. A sliver of a man's sleeve at the edge. Blue suit. Crisp cuff. I told myself it was a stranger. Now I wasn't sure. There was the laptop tension, too, not just the angle but the way she'd snap it closed like she was saving a bird from flying out. If I asked what she was working on, she gave me jargon that sounded correct and empty at the same time. Deck revisions for the Series B story. Messaging alignment. Board prep. Words that meant something, sure. Just not to us. I thought about the last time she'd asked me to pick her up from work. It used to be our excuse for a late-night drive, fast food fries, the kind of silly conversation couples have when the world is quiet. Lately she Ubered home. No point dragging you across town, she'd say. Practical, kind, distant. The three adjectives you use when you're choosing a tone instead of telling a truth. Back at the apartment, the living room was museum still. I poured water and tasted dust. On the console table sat the framed photo from our trip to Mendocino. Wind in her hair, a gull in the background, my arm around her like a promise I assumed was mutual. I tried to match that version of us to the gala version and felt the gears strip. In the bedroom, her closet door was slightly ajar. The green dress wasn't hanging there. It was draped over a chair like a contented cat. The necklace sat in its box on the dresser, a velvet square I didn't recognize. No brand logo. Minimalist, careful, expensive. I picked it up, felt the weight of the pendant, set it down. My reflection in the mirror looked like a man touching evidence he couldn't submit anywhere. I kept stacking small facts. Saturdays had changed shape. She used to wake slowly, steal my hoodie, make pancakes, burn exactly one, laugh about it like it was a ritual the batter insisted on. Now she slipped out to yoga, returned with hair washed and makeup set. Not like someone who had sweated through vinyas, but like someone stepping back onto a stage. When I teased her, K*ler workout? She smiled and said the studio had good showers. I didn't know what a good shower meant anymore. I'm not proud of the next part. I'm not even sure when the line got crossed, only that I found myself standing by her handbag one Sunday while she showered. I told myself I was looking for a rogue receipt to satisfy a math problem in my head. Her phone lit up with a preview that was nothing and everything. Unknown number. Still thinking of your pitch. The word pitch should have calmed me. Didn't. I stepped back like I'd touched an electric fence. I tried to be scientific, to chart it all. Dates, times, excuses, the slope of our conversations down to weather and grocery lists. But the human part of me kept piping up with details that didn't fit on a spreadsheet. How she laughed with her mouth closed now. How her hug landed an inch further away than it used to. How she'd started saying, I, where we used to say we. It's amazing how many synonyms there are for goodbye. The night after the gala, Melissa climbed into bed, her back to me. Long day, she whispered to the dark. I stared at the ceiling fan turning like a slow thought. You okay? She asked after a beat, not turning around. Fine, I said, which is the loneliest word in the English language when you say it to someone who taught you better ones. I could have asked her then. I could have said, who gave you the necklace? I could have said, Jared doesn't get to call me nobody. But we were lying on parallel rails, and somewhere in the distance a train was coming, and I was too tired to lift my head and see whether it was ours. In the morning she left early, kissed my temple, smelled like the winter lobby again. After the door clicked shut, the apartment made a soft sound, the kind you only hear when something has shifted and you're pretending it hasn't. I sat with my coffee and made a deal with myself. If this is nothing, it will vanish when light hits it. If it's something, it will keep its shape. Kept its shape. All week the pattern hardened. Late nights turned to later ones. The client mixer became a team offsite, which turned into we're grabbing a nightcap. I'll be quiet when I come in. When I suggested we skip the next corporate thing and go see the tree lighting downtown, the one she had dragged me to every year, she said she couldn't. The board was in town and optics mattered. I didn't say, whose optics? I didn't say, why am I suddenly an optic you're managing? I told myself I'd wait until I had something undeniable. Something I could hold up to the light without it dissolving. Until then, I rehearsed my lines in the car, in the shower, in the elevator at work, while small talk slid off me like rain. The line kept changing, but the feeling didn't. A tightness across the chest, like my ribs had decided to guard a secret even I wasn't allowed to see. People love to say you always know. Maybe that's true. But sometimes you know like you know a storm is coming. By the way the air goes still, by the birds disappearing, by the long, low sound you can't explain to anyone who didn't hear it too. I knew. I just hadn't admitted it yet. So I waited. I watched the shape hold. A week after the gala, proof didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like spam. Monday morning, my inbox looked like a thrift store bin, receipts, newsletters, reminders I kept meaning to unsubscribe from. Buried between "your statement is ready" and "limited time winter sale." There it was. No subject line, no sender name, just an address stitched out of random letters and numbers. The preview showed a single word. Sorry. I told myself to delete it. Then I told myself to forward it to junk so I could delete it with ceremony later, the way you sweep glass into a dustpan as if ritual helps. Instead, I clicked. The body held one sentence, stripped of greeting, punctuation, and courage. Thought you should know. Below it, 3 attachments waited in a tidy row: IMG_1127, IMG_1128, IMG_1129. Like teeth. I hovered, feeling ridiculous and also like my life had become a hallway with one final door. The first photo loaded slowly, line by stubborn line. The image resolved into the mezzanine outside the ballroom at the Central Plaza Hotel. Flocked wallpaper, brass railing, a ribbon of garland. And in the center, Melissa and Jared. They were close enough that the camera didn't need to try. She held a champagne flute, head tilted, the emerald dress carved by the light exactly as I remembered. Around her neck, that delicate necklace threw a thin comet streak across her skin. Jared's hand rested at her waist, not hovering, not gentlemanly. Placed. The kind of placement you don't argue with because you've already agreed. I told myself I might be misreading. I told myself the angle could be weird. Then I opened the second attachment. In this one, their faces were turned toward each other. Eyes half-lidded, as if they'd decided long before the camera decided anything. You can't fake proximity in a still frame the way you can fake it on a stage. Their bodies knew the choreography. The moment before a kiss is sometimes more honest than the kiss itself, but the third photo erased even that mercy. Their mouths together, soft and certain, champagne catching a tiny constellation of light near her cheek, while his thumb pressed into the small of her back like a signature. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until the trackpad misread my fingers and made the picture jump. I set the laptop on the table and stood, suddenly aware that breathing was manual labor. The kitchen looked wrong, too bright. IK** led the overhead and the room sank into an overcast gray that felt truer. I went back to the email. No message history, no footer, no metadata that meant anything to me. I downloaded the files to a folder I named December, because I couldn't bring myself to call it what it was. I stared at the sender's address and tried to reverse engineer a conscience from random characters. Sorry. Thought you should know. Sent by whom? A coworker with a grudge? An assistant with a conscience? A stranger who couldn't stand the taste of the secret anymore? It didn't matter. The photos already had more authority than any confession. I forwarded the message to my personal archive, to an attorney inbox I'd set up years ago and never used, to a cloud account with a password only I knew. It felt paranoid and also like buckling a seat belt after the crash. Then I sat back down and looked again because that is the bargain a wound makes. You can keep the pain if you keep looking. New details surfaced once my pulse slowed. The mezzanine clock read 9:47 p.m. The toasts had ended by then. People would have been drifting toward the bar, toward rideshares, toward smug goodbyes. In the reflection of the brass railing, a sliver of the photographer's sleeve suggested they were close, bold, or both. A staff badge hung on a lanyard near the edge of the frame. Maybe that's where the sorry lived. The worst part wasn't the kiss. The worst part was the expression on Melissa's face just before it. How relaxed she looked, how unstartled by joy. Not a stumble, not even a lapse. A choice she had rehearsed until it felt like muscle memory. I imagined walking into her office with printed copies and setting them on her desk like a still life. I imagined rage the way a dry field imagines a match. But under the noise was a voice I barely recognized. You asked for something that wouldn't dissolve in daylight. This is it. Start acting like a person who knows. So I didn't call her. I opened and closed the laptop until the hinge sounded like a metronome for grief. I made coffee I didn't drink and watched the steam give up. By the time the cup went cold, I had arranged my day into tasks that looked like living. Answer 3 emails, return 1 call, pretend to eat lunch. At noon, Melissa texted, running late. Bored lunch. Don't wait up for dinner, smiley face. and my phone buzzed against the image of her hand on Jared's lapel, against the necklace that wasn't from me. I typed OK and hit send before the anger could learn to spell. The afternoon passed in a trance of competence. I met deadlines with the focus of someone who doesn't want to know what comes after focus. Late light pooled on the floor. Outside, the street copied its routine from yesterday. Dogs rehearsed their owners. The mail carrier worked the same obedient line. I envied everything that didn't have to wonder what it was to itself. By evening, I had studied the photos long enough to memorize the carpet pattern behind them. I printed one copy of each and slid them into a plain envelope, because some part of me still believed in paper, in the way a truth feels heavier once it's given weight. I put the envelope in the safe behind a stack of documents no one reads twice. Then I washed my hands like I'd handled something toxic and opened the windows to winter air. With the proof sitting there like a loaded word, my mind rewound to the gala floor, to the microphone, to Jared saying nobody while a room laughed in my direction. The sequence rearranged itself. The joke wasn't a misstep. It was a thesis. He wasn't just someone at her office. In that moment, he believed he could name me and be correct. And Melissa laughed first, as if to sign the transcript. I sat at the desk until the numbers on the clock lost meaning. At 11:13, another text. Crazy day. Might crash at my place to be up early. Love you. The words were ordinary, but every letter felt counterfeit. I looked at the safe and understood that the next time we spoke, nothing would be ordinary again. I tried to sleep and failed. The bedroom shrank and expanded like a faulty lung. I watched the ceiling and negotiated with the dark. Part of me wanted to detonate everything at once. Rip off the bandage, salt the earth, walk away from the crater. Another part wanted precision. Dates, timelines, confirmations, a clean edge to the cut. In the end, I chose stillness, not because it felt brave, but because I was afraid of what I'd say if I spoke. In the morning, I woke to the sound of the building's heat clanking through the pipes like someone knocking from the other side of a wall. I made toast I didn't eat and drafted 2 emails I didn't send. The proof didn't change the weather, but it changed the light. It made every ordinary object look staged. The coffee mug, the coat on the chair, the shoes by the door we'd both used 1,000 times. Our life looked like a set we'd forgotten to leave. On my way out, I caught my reflection and didn't recognize the man looking back. He wasn't broken. He was sharpened. I slid the envelope deeper into the safe and turned the dial with a steady hand. I had asked the universe for something undeniable. It answered. Now it was my turn. The photographs never left my mind, but they also never left the folder in the safe. They sat there like a loaded P** and I wasn't ready to fire. A week passed in a strange quiet. Melissa going about her routine as though nothing had changed, me answering her small talk with non-committal nods. Every exchange was polite enough to be believable and brittle enough to snap. It was in that stillness I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. Years ago, in a moment that had seemed purely strategic at the time, I'd invested in a venture capital fund with a complicated web of holdings. One of those holdings had eventually bought a controlling interest in Jared's company. I'd kept my name off the shareholder registry, preferring anonymity so the company could operate without my shadow over it, but I had the documents. And the documents meant something now. I went into my home office, closed the door, and retrieved the thick black binder from the locked drawer. Inside were layers of transactions, each one intentionally opaque. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, cross-holdings designed to be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. I'd kept the map of the structure tucked into a sealed envelope in case I ever needed to explain it to a lawyer. Now, I unfolded it on my desk, tracing the lines with my finger until they converged neatly at the truth. I owned Jared's company. Not outright, but in a way that could be made outright if I wanted it to be. For a long moment I just sat there, staring at that fact as though it had been waiting for me all along. I could walk away from Melissa without ever saying a word to him, let them both stew in their own undoing. But that thought felt incomplete. Jared hadn't just been Melissa's accomplice. He'd been the man who looked me in the eye at a public event, called me nobody, and placed his hand on my wife's waist like it belonged there. That kind of arrogance deserved a reply. I began making calls, not the kind you leave on voicemails, I called people who answered on the first ring, people I'd worked with for decades. My legal team first to verify what I already suspected. With the right push, I could gain majority control without alarming Jared or the board. Then my financial advisors, who had been the architects of this web in the first place. They didn't ask why. They knew from my tone this wasn't a hypothetical exercise. Start a full audit, I told them. Everything, subsidiaries, expense accounts, personal dealings. I want it thorough and I want it fast. Audits have a way of rattling cages, but Jared wouldn't see the connection right away. He'd assume it was regulatory or maybe even an internal cleanup. I could already picture him smoothing his tie, telling Melissa it was just background noise while they clinked glasses in some dim bar. The image hardened my resolve. By midweek, I had a plan. It wasn't enough to quietly buy him out. I wanted the removal to be surgical, undeniable. I wanted him to walk into his office one morning and find that the name on the CEO's door wasn't his anymore. The mechanics were straightforward once the team was in motion. A buyout of the remaining voting shares from 2 minority stakeholders who had been looking for an exit, an emergency board meeting scheduled under the pretense of restructuring for market conditions, and a ready candidate for the CEO role, Hannah, a manager I'd worked with before, competent, principled, respected by her teams. The opposite of Jared in every way that mattered. While the deals were drafted, I kept my exterior calm. Melissa noticed I was spending more hours in my office but didn't ask. If she suspected, she gave no sign. Maybe she thought I was nursing my pride, or maybe she thought she'd gotten away with it. I didn't care to speculate. My focus wasn't on repairing what was broken. It was on deciding what would replace it. The final piece was timing. I wanted the handover to happen at the same Central Plaza hotel where Jared had introduced me as nobody. The symmetry appealed to me in a way I didn't entirely understand until I imagined the scene. The same chandeliers, the same stage lights, but a very different ending. I signed the final authorization late on a Thursday night. The documents were couriered to Jared the next morning for his signature, framed as an emergency capital injection, requiring his consent. He'd sign because the wording made it look like a safeguard for the company's liquidity, a move no reasonable executive would refuse. And when he did, the last of his leverage would vanish into my portfolio. That weekend, I locked the binder back in the drawer. My desk was clear except for one envelope, the photographs from the anonymous email. I considered adding them to the safe again, but instead, I left them where I could see them. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that clarity has a cost, and I had paid it. On Monday, the pieces would fall into place. And when they did, Jared would no longer be CEO. He'd no longer be in a position to offer my wife a necklace she didn't buy or a hand at her waist in front of an applauding room. And Melissa, she'd realize her world had shifted without me ever raising my voice. I wasn't striking in anger. I was striking in precision. And the precision was almost complete. The conference room they gave us at the Central Plaza Hotel had the same view as the ballroom. Winter sun flaring off the glass towers across the avenue, snow lingering in the seams of the rooftops. I'd chosen it deliberately. Memory ought to have a front row seat when justice clocks in. Jared arrived 5 minutes late, tie loosened just enough to look important. He brought his CFO and a junior counsel who still had the optimism of someone who believed contracts were sturdy things. Melissa wasn't with them. Good. I didn't want the personal and the professional to breathe the same air today. He shook my hand like we were equals. Evan, he said, measured and smooth, appreciate the quick meeting. Likewise, I said. The table was set with folders, pens, water bottles aligned like chess pieces. My counsel, Lydia, sat to my right, impassive and ready. We opened with small talk a surgeon might make before anesthesia. Market headwinds. Supply chain drift. He nodded at the bullet points like he'd written them himself. When the binder slid in front of him, he didn't flinch. This is a bridge facility, he read, flipping pages. Short-term liquidity support secured by non-voting shares. Sensible. He glanced at his team. We'll sign today. Lydia smiled without moving her eyes. There's also a governance addendum. Standard protections for the capital provider. He skimmed. Board expansion by 2 seats. filled at lender discretion. A shrug. Fine. And a conversion, right? I added. If certain covenants trip. They won't. His pen clicked once. Let's get this done. I watched him sign where the flags told him to, a neat looped signature repeating across the pages like a practiced lie. Each stroke moved ownership by a degree he couldn't feel yet, like water warming toward a boil. When his counsel finally paused, brow creasing, I saw the moment of static catch. Section 7. 4, she said softly. Voting alignment upon conversion grants, effective control. Jared waved a hand. Only if covenants trip. Lydia folded her hands. And given your current ratios, they will at the audit close. He looked up then, the first crack in his composure. Audit. Comprehensive, I said. Initiated last week. You'll have full reports by end of day. Silence spread like ink. I let it settle. We're just shoring up, he attempted. Everyone's doing this. Everyone isn't doing this with me, I said. He set the pen down. What is this, Evan? It's continuity, I replied. For the company. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full story. He finished signing because men like Jared always finish signing. They believe in momentum more than consequences. When the last page was executed, Lydia gathered the stack and slid a single envelope back across the table. My letter to the board calling an emergency session in the adjacent room. Now? He asked. Now? I said. The board was already assembled when we walked in, directors who remembered what the company once stood for, and 2 new faces who had just sold me their shares. I took the seat at the end, not the head. Jared tried to take the head and found Lydia already there, her laptop open, minutes templated. We began with the audit preliminaries. Expenses categorized too kindly. Travel that looked more like lifestyle. Vendor invoices that circled the block and came back dressed as legitimacy. I didn't raise my voice. Numbers scold perfectly well. He tried to bark it down. This is transitional noise. It's a pattern, a director said. And patterns have outcomes. Lydia presented the executed bridge documents. The conversion right lit the screen like sunrise. Effective upon close, she said. Voting alignment transfers to the capital provider. To me, I said, so there was no confusion. Jared laughed, short and brittle. You? Since when are you a capital provider? Since before you called me nobody under those chandeliers, I answered. I preferred anonymity. You cured me of it. A murmur traveled around the table, the weight of what was happening finally landing. Corporate law is a choreography. Today I knew every step. Motion to convert. Seconded. Vote recorded. The math did the talking. Effective immediately, Lydia read. The board recognizes a change in control. Agenda item 2, leadership. I turned to Hannah, seated along the wall with her notebook. She rose like she didn't owe the room anything except competence. Hannah has delivered every quarter without burning the trust that makes those numbers mean something, I said. I nominate her as Chief Executive Officer. A director cleared his throat. Second. We voted. The numbers moved again, simple and irrevocable. Hannah accepted with a steady breath. My first act is dull, she said. We're closing the expense spigot and reopening the books. My second is not. We rebuild reputation from the inside out. No shortcuts. There was applause, not theatrical, just grateful. Jared stood, palms flat on the table. You can't do this. We just did, Lydia said. He looked at me, searching for the personal in the professional like a key mislaid in a drawer. This is because of her. Yes, I said, because sometimes the cleanest thing you can do is tell the truth. And because of you. Security didn't need to escort him. Pride marched him out faster than any arm could. His CFO trailed, suddenly interested in door frames and carpet seams. When the room emptied, I walked to the window. The city looked the same, buses making their routes, a cyclist braving slush, a florist carrying buckets through steam. But there was a new quiet in me. Not triumph. Alignment. Hannah joined me. You going to the staff meeting? "I'll introduce you," I said. "Then I'm gone." She nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about all of it." "Make the place honest," I said. "That's apology enough." We took the elevator down to a different floor where the staff had gathered. The same hotel that had held my humiliation now held a row of folding chairs and a lectern with a frayed microphone cover. I spoke briefly. "A company deserves leadership that respects the work more than the mirror." Then I stepped aside.